Hey there. I'm excited to announce this to you today. This is what you've been waiting for in your spiritual quest. This is something I've wanted to do for a long time, and I'm finally ready to announce it that it's ready to go. It's the Grief to Growth Community Circle. Now, this is a sanctuary where like-minded souls are united in their journey through grief and towards personal transformation. It's more than just a place. It's a beginning. It's a commitment to growth and understanding. Here you're finding not just a community, but you're entering a circle of trust and depth. You're going to engage with interactive coursework. You'll dive into exclusive podcast episodes and partake in discussions that illuminate the path from mourning to empowerment. This is a realm where every question is honored and every individual's journey is validated. To be part of this exclusive circle, visit us at grieftogrowth.com/community or look for the chat icon at the bottom of every page on the main website. Remember that entry is a privilege because I want to ensure that every member is as dedicated and genuine as you are. You must apply to join, but the journey within is worth every step. So go ahead and join us today. Check it out, grieftogrowth.com/community, and I look forward to seeing you there.
Hi there. Welcome to the Grief to Growth podcast. Your host is Brian Smith, spiritual seeker, grief survivor, and life coach. Brian believes that the worst tragedies of life provide the greatest opportunity for growth. Brian says he was planted, not buried, and he's here to help you grow where you've been planted. In each episode, Brian and his guests will share what has helped them to survive and thrive. His sincere hope is that this episode helps you today.
And now, a brief word from our sponsor. When I decided I was going to do a podcast, I knew there were more moving parts than most people expect. How do you record a podcast? Where do you host it? How much will it cost? Do I need special software? How do I distribute it? All these questions were in my mind. I was all set to go with another podcast hosting company. Then I heard about Anchor. I believe that Anchor is the easiest way to make a podcast. Anchor gives you everything you need in one place. You can use it right from your phone or from your computer. Anchor is not only free, you can even make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. Anchor's creation tools allow you to record and edit your podcast so it sounds great. They'll even distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard everywhere: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and many more. So download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. That's Anchor, ANCHOR.FM as in FM radio. And now, back to our episode. Today's interview is with Tricia Barker. I've known Tricia for a while now. I've heard her speak several times on different podcasts, and she travels around speaking about her near-death experience she had when she was a senior in college. Her near-death experience is really interesting because it's what's called a veridical experience, which means she actually had an experience that could verify that she was outside of her body at one time at least. But what's more important about the interview with Tricia and about her book, Angels in the OR, is how her near-death experience changed and has shaped her life over the course of the time since she had the experience several years ago. She's become a teacher. She teaches English, but more importantly, she teaches people about life, about angel communications, and basically what the meaning of life is. So I hope you enjoyed the interview. Here is Tricia Barker. Hey, everybody. This is Brian Smith, your host of Grief to Growth, and I'm here today with Tricia Barker. Tricia and I met on Facebook a while ago. I've heard Tricia's on other podcasts, and I've also read her book, Angels in the OR, which is a fascinating book. So she was gracious enough to agree to sit down and do an interview with me today. I want to introduce Tricia. There's a lot to say about her. She's an author. She's an NDE experiencer. She's a speaker. She's a writing teacher. She has a YouTube channel, which is Near Death Experience Healed by the Light, or you can find her by searching on Tricia Barker on YouTube. She's also a college professor. So Tricia's got a lot going on. And Tricia, the main, I think, impetus for your book, which is called Angels in the OR, was your near-death experience. So with that, I want to say welcome, Tricia. And go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. And certainly the impetus for writing the book was the near-death experience, and to make that more mainstream and just a part of the culture, because the more people who talk about it from all different walks of life, I think the more accepted these experiences are. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Near-death experiences for me helped me a ton, just studying it, first of all, to believe, and then secondly, learning the lessons from near-death experiences, because I think there's some universal lessons that are not just for the person that has the experience, but for all of us. So maybe we could start off by you telling us about your experience.
Yeah, that's a great question. I would like to actually start with a few of those universal lessons, if that's okay. That has what has stayed with me for so long. So that idea, and I keep coming back to them, that love is all that matters. I think people struggle with that idea, but I think that it's a really profound and healing and powerful idea, that no matter what happens in this physical plane, no matter what we go through, love is the great healer. Love is what we take with us. What we do from a place of love is our highest good and our highest calling. And that was a concept at 22 as a college student, and that did not cross my mind. Mm-hmm. I was very much a part of this culture, as many young people are. I just wanted success. I just wanted some security. I just wanted to be okay. Really, I didn't think about any spiritual deep questions or anything about my quote purpose. I thought my purpose was just to succeed, like you either do or you don't. So the experience, and you can find the full experience on YouTube in so many different places, but I'll just briefly go into it if you'd like. But I had a major car accident, and this took me into emergency spinal surgery. I was on my way to run the Austin 10K. I waited many, many hours in the ER before I was taken in, and I had internal injuries. What happened is, as soon as I was under, my spirit form left my body. And that was so exciting. I can't tell you as an agnostic how excited I was. I was convinced in those first few seconds that, this is the real reality, and this physical reality is just part of the reality. Now I'm seeing the bigger story. And that was my first thought, was, okay, this is what continues, this spirit form. And I felt clear and happy, as odd as that sounds, but I just felt, okay, cool. I understand these things. And the surgeons were busy at work. And the next part of the experience that really blew my mind was the light beings, or angels, in the room. And that's why I titled the book Angels in the OR, because that was the strongest image of the whole experience. Because you almost expect to see your body, on the operating table. You expect to see surgeons, but angels, that is unusual. And I didn't really have a concept from religion about them, maybe a few paintings, a few poems. But what struck me is how intelligent they were, and how much they knew and understood, and their healing capacity, because they sent this light through the back of the surgeons and into my body. And I knew this light was intelligence, communication, healing, many things at once. And that image really stayed with me. Now, the near-death experience continued on. I had a life review, which I talk about in great depth and in different videos. But at that time, my only big lesson was not to judge people based on the way they looked. So I was really style conscious. That sounds so silly, but as young people are, if you didn't like the same movies I liked, the same documentaries, you didn't dress like me and go hear these bands, I just wasn't interested in you. And that's a really limited way of looking at the world, but it's a young person's way sometimes of looking at culture and how we fit in. And what I saw is all these lovely people all around me. One Catholic couple who prayed for me. They took time out of their day because they thought I was depressed, and I worked with them. And I realized that the heart of people, that's where we should look, because God was looking at my heart. And by all outward standards, I would have been judged a lot harsher by those around me than God judged me. God saw that I was hurting, and that a lot of what I did was done out of pain. And a lot of what I did was self-harm, not harm to other people. And that was kind of brushed away. Like, that's not a big deal. Like, just be better, be good to yourself, be good to others. It wasn't this like horrible, you're going to burn in hell for doing drugs or, anything like that. It was just be better, be loving, be kind, be good. And that was so relieving, that God's love was that great, that grace was so powerful. Mm-hmm. So that was one of the big lessons. And then I moved into this heavenly realm, and people always wonder about this realm. To me, it felt like a holding place. It didn't feel like you just stay in this place of green grass and beautiful trees. And, it seemed like it was a place to rest for a moment and to think about what comes next. And this is where I met the one person who was dead, my grandfather, who looked great. He had died of leukemia and was close to, 75 or so when he died. But now he looked about 35, and his skin glowed and his eyes glowed, and he looked the light in his eyes was somewhat like that of the angels, because it communicated. So he talked with telepathy and gave me this deep peace. At some point, he asked me if I wanted to go on. And by go on, I knew that meant go towards the light. And I felt other people's prayers. And this is an interesting part of my near-death experience, because people want to know, hey, I prayed and this didn't happen. Or, I prayed and this happened. What I felt the prayers as was an energy of love. And whether or not I stayed or came back wasn't dependent on that. I just felt their energy. And I kind of broke through that energy and was going towards that love of God. But I felt everything that they said. And I think if someone prays for someone who was passing on, just know that they felt it. They felt your love. Mm-hmm. And that message of love is all that matters. Be like a little child. Look into the hearts of others, be kind to others, remind them to go to nature. These are some of the illuminating ideas that I begin to feel in that realm. Mm-hmm. And I think prayer and energy, and that energy of love, is real, but it doesn't necessarily force something to happen. Like that their prayers could not hold me back if I was meant to go on.
Right.
So I was going on towards that love of God. And this is the part of the near-death experience that I come back to over and over again, because life here is difficult. I'm not going to lie. There are many times that I look around this world and I think it's not very loving. And then other times I'm very encouraged by all the love that people are giving and doing. And so it's a mix of things. But in that presence of God, there was no mix of anything. It was pure love. It was love of the highest order, highest degree, the most healing love I've ever felt in my life. And everything, anytime that I felt, oh, I'm not loved, how could this have happened to me, was washed away. That I knew God as the truth, I knew God as love, and I knew that I was loved and I was safe to love. I kept going toward this light, wanted to leave all of earth behind, anyone I'd known. I really was done with my life at that point, and really happy to be in this presence of this love. But I was stopped and given a particular message. And my near-death experience has been researched a lot because of the mission that I was given, and also a verifiable fact that I had outside of form, which researchers love. I didn't need that fact, but researchers love it. I was given a mission to come back and teach, not as a spiritual teacher necessarily, but as an actual teacher.
Yeah.
And that mission made a lot more sense later, which we can talk about if you want. But in the moment, I was pretty upset. I was like, no, God. I grew up poor. Teachers don't make any money. No. This is not the career for me. On another level, I didn't even want to do something traditional for women. The idea of teaching or nursing or something like that did not appeal to me. And I didn't have a choice. That was the last thing. Of course, God kind of laughed. That was the last thing that my rebellious soul could learn, was that was my mission, and I was going to have to do it. And then I was back in the recovery room, and I knew I had a near-death experience. Never doubted it for a second.
So I want to touch on a couple of things you talked about there. One, you mentioned that you were agnostic when this happened. You were raised religious, I assume?
Yeah, I was raised in, I've never really even talked about this, but I was raised in a beautiful church at first. It was called Agape Force, and David Wilkerson was the minister out in East Texas, and he wrote Crossing the Switchblade. And He was very full of this love and this drive to get people off drugs and alcohol and bring them into the presence of God. And we were working on children's records, so it was very creative. I sang in the choir in many of these records, and it was just a ton of fun. And I did connect with God in the country and in these pure ways. You know, I accepted Jesus at a young age. I knew so much of the Bible. And that was home to me. But then eventually he moved away, became more corporate, and people seemed more judgmental to me. You know, it was more about, and I was always going to place last in a fashion, contest because of growing up poor, and church just didn't have the same energy. And so I also looked around at family members who stayed married, and they were in bad marriages, sometimes abusive marriages, but they stayed because of the Bible. And I was rebellious. You know, by the time I was in junior high, I was calling everybody out, telling my parents to get divorced. You know, I thought religion just didn't have a place. It wasn't making their lives better. So my intellectual mind said, done with it.
Yeah. I think that's a phase that a lot of us go through. So I think that's a fairly normal phase. So did you find yourself surprised when you were in the presence of angels and the presence of, you used the term God, so I assume you believe in God.
Oh, yeah. I don't just believe, I know. And I know that's irritating to people, because people, live on faith and belief. But to me, God is an energy now. God is this loving force that is real. It's not something I have to believe in. It's something I feel, and I pray to, open myself up to that feeling. But yeah, I was surprised that we go on, and I couldn't wait. All my friends were agnostic. I couldn't wait to come back and argue with them. I thought I could convince them instantly. It was taking a little longer, but yeah, I was convinced immediately. Never had a doubt about my experience. Never thought it was my brain shutting down. I knew what I experienced.
Well, and you touched on the vertical aspect of your experience. And I know you said that's not, all that important to you, but for people like myself who haven't had an experience, and when I study these, I have to say the ones I find the most interesting, just like the researchers, are the ones that have some evidence, because otherwise we can just say it was a dream, it was hallucination, it was just your brain shutting down. So would you mind just touching on what the evidence was?
Yeah, so after I saw the angels working on my body, the monitor flatlined, and I knew I was dead at that point. So the first part was like an out-of-body experience. When I saw the monitor flatline, I knew I was dead, and I immediately left the operating room. There was so much blood because my back was open up. I didn't want to see how they were going to try to revive me. And as I went, my spirit went through the walls. I saw my stepdad get a candy bar, and he had only been married to my mom for a couple of years. I didn't really know him that well because I was in college at the time they got married. And I remember thinking, they have this ego about them. Like, they will tell people, don't drink that Diet Coke, don't eat that sugar. They're like always calling people out on how they eat. And I was like, he's eating junk, so it made me laugh that he had this secret, addiction to sugar and was kind of hiding it from people. But later, after I was recovering at my mom's house, I asked her if my stepdad got that candy bar that I saw. And she said, yeah, in fact, your dad and I were on our knees praying at that moment because we really felt like you had died in surgery. And we felt like we'd lost you. And he came back in with this candy bar, made a joke, split the candy bar with us. And we continued on. And that was the first time he'd met my dad. So it was a little awkward, the meeting room. But that detail, I didn't even know would be that important to people, but it certainly was important to Dr. Jan Holden and other people who've researched these experiences. And what's important to me is that my parents knew the moment I had died. So
yeah, I was just going to say, I just picked up on that. It's like somehow they sensed that you had died that moment.
Yeah, so I believe that biological, spiritual connection between parents and kids is profound, and they knew it on some level. And to me, that was the bigger confirmation than the fact that, yes, he did get that candy bar. Later, I did find out he did have a secret stash of, Oreos and stuff in his closet.
So, and when you came out of the operation, I know you had some interactions with your doctor. Did they ever acknowledge that you flatlined on the table?
My surgeon did acknowledge it, but ever so briefly. So that was one of the first things I asked her. I said, "Hey, how long was I dead?" And she kind of stepped back and she said, "Well, we thought we lost you for a couple of minutes, but all is well now." And she kept wanting to focus on how well the surgery had gone and how I'd lost feeling in the leg before and I had feeling after the surgery. So they had picked the bone fragments off the spine that were harming that leg. And that's all she wanted to focus on. And it's understandable. No surgeon wants to look at how they almost lost the patient. They want to look at how well they did at helping the patient.
Well, they're also kind of worried about liability and things of that nature. So I can understand why they would be reluctant. So you had this experience, you're going along your life, you're a young college student and you got all these plans for your life and you're told you're going to be a teacher. As you said, traditional female type of role where you're not going to make a lot of money, but I guess you were convinced enough by this experience, that's what you did. You decided to become a teacher.
Yeah, so I had a year to reflect on the idea of it, and I had to learn to walk again, and I was in this body cast, and I read a lot of books, and it hit me that I probably wouldn't have even been at college if it wasn't for this one English teacher who believed in me. And so I thought, okay, we'll give this a shot, maybe 5 years, and then I can go do something else. So, I talked myself into it and as a way of giving back to the world and giving back, but I didn't have any other options. I thought, my entire life was almost taken away and then it was given back to me for this one reason. I better do this. Yeah. So I didn't understand why, but I understood as soon as I got in the classroom because everything that I had experienced, other kids had experienced to greater degrees. And I think anyone who's been a victim of child abuse or neglect or poverty or anything, they always wish someone would have seen them and would have given them some advice or helped them in some way. And I realized that I could do that for others, that I could see people where they were. And, maybe I wasn't going to save their entire life, but I was going to give them advice in that moment, be present with them and help them get through that moment. And I thought, I'm made for this. I mean, there's no other job that would have given me that access. And then after a near-death experience, you're super intuitive. You're just very opened up to other people's pain. So I could read it in kids. I could be creative with how to help them. And that I was joyful. And I have to tell you that, I suffered with depression before the experience and after the experience. But anytime I was in motion, helping other people, that love of God, that light of God, the angels were working through me. And perhaps I had more benefit than the students. Sometimes I've thought, that maybe God did that for me, to begin to heal those wounds. Because as I gave a piece of healing to others, I was receiving great healing from God.
Yeah, that's what I tell people also. I found that being of service is people sometimes will say to me, well, it's great you're doing the things you're doing to help other people, but being of service is actually very helpful for me. And it makes me feel like I have purpose, which I think human beings need. I think it's one of the things that's kind of lacking in the world is people figure out what am I here to do? And when I hear people like you say the answer is love, well, then people say, well, how do I do that? And it's different with everybody, but it's basically serving. Finding people, finding what they need. And I was really, when I read your book, of course I read it because of the near-death experience, but seeing your life before and how it unfolded, seeing that kind of pivotal moment, and then seeing how your life unfolded after that, and seeing how that all makes sense and how you're helping so many people now, it's a beautiful story.
Yeah. And, community is another thing that I think we're lacking as well. And I realized that I could create community in classrooms, that I could make other people get to know one another and care about one another and develop empathy and not look at the classroom as a competitive place, but look at it as a place where, hey, we can all get really good grades in here and I can help you study and, I can help you write your paper and I can help you get through life too. And that was part of the mission too, was creating community, because as we share each other's burdens, we, part of our burden gets lightened as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because I was talking with someone earlier today about, some of the issues in our society. And we were talking about the big push to STEM now, right? Pushing all the kids to go into STEM because that's what you need to do to make a living. but we're forgetting to teach people how to be full human beings, to teach people about compassion and empathy and duty to others and things of that nature. So having a person like you in the classroom to be able to do that for kids, I think is extremely important. And I really hate the way in our society we undervalue teachers and how important teachers can be in our lives. I think most of us can think back on a teacher that changed our life, a teacher that touched us, as you said, just by seeing us, just by seeing that you're okay. So what you're doing is, obviously it's a huge benefit, a huge importance.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hey there, something I want to tell you about today. My podcast platform, Buzzsprout, has recently made it easier for me to allow you to support me financially. Go to www.grieftogrowth.com/subscribe. That's grief2growth.com/subscribe. And once you're there, you can sign up to support me financially. Now, you can do it for as little as $3 a month, or of course, as much as you'd like. If you do that, you'll get access to bonus episodes, and you'll see those in the regular feed. They'll have a lock on them. But when you become a subscriber, you'll actually get access to your own private feed, and you'll be able to listen to the regular podcast along with the bonus podcast for the subscribers. I want to thank you for listening. I want to thank you for sharing the podcast. And I want to thank those of you who support me financially. Have a great day, and on to the episode.
There are some schools I'm researching right now, George Mason University, that has a resilience program and a well-being program. So kids can put that on their resume, that they've learned things like self-love and self-awareness and empathy. And I think that's just amazing, that there's a focus on resilience, because that's incredibly important. We're all going to go through difficult things, and how do we get through it and still make the rest of our lives work. And so those types of programs are important. And I'm trying to bring that to the community college level too.
That sounds great, because again, I keep thinking about some of the crises we're going through right now, but with young people and suicides, and with the drug epidemic and the mass shootings and all those things. And I don't know where we've lost it, teaching people things like that, resilience, like you said, how do we get through these times? How do we bounce back? But also community. How do we rely on other people and reach out to other people? And people feel so lonely. I think now it's just amazing. We're all so inundated with social media, but we feel alone.
Yeah, I know. You can have an Instagram star in your class with 320,000 followers, but yet she has very few friends. And that's incredibly sad to me. That's why I play jokes with my kids, and I'm like, I'm going to show up 5 minutes late to class, and you're going to all tell me what's going on in each other's lives. So I walk in and they do that. Just so that they know each other. And I think that's important.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. Your book is Angels in the R, and you talk about angels a lot. And I grew up not in a tradition that really places much emphasis on angels in our day-to-day lives anyway. So how does angel communication work, and what should we be looking for doing?
Yeah, so initially all I used it for was the classroom. So I'd pray to God. Eventually I prayed to angels though too, because I saw them working through the surgeons, and I said, if you want to work through me to help a particular student, go ahead. And it wasn't a long prayer. It was just sometimes in the restroom before I walked in the classroom. Hey, you want to work through me? Go ahead. and that was that. Mm-hmm. And honestly, they would sometimes. So I would just have a lecture. English is a great course to teach, especially literature, because you can talk about a poem or a story, and it can have a theme that ties to humanity or someone's life in particular. And I'd feel some energy take over, and call it channeling, call it being used, whatever you want to call it. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't know sometimes what I said, but I would have students come up to me afterwards in tears saying, hey, I'm going to join the Peace Corps. I'm like, oh God, I hope that's the right choice. I'd have all kind of, epiphanies that mm-hmm. students would have, emotional and spiritual and life goals. And I thought, this is real. This is some force working through me. And even if it was just to bring a tiny bit of love or a tiny bit of peace into a situation, mm-hmm. then, that was the goal as well. But I've worked more with them, obviously, since writing the book and thinking about the topic more. And I call on them to feel protection in certain areas. I call on them. Of course, I still have some PTSD in cars, so I call, on them to give me a little more peace driving and in heavy traffic. And I do feel a certain protection, but we have to call them. We have to ask them to be with us. And I think they are waiting around for us to ask, and that they are connected to God's intelligence. They're just a way of doing that. Now, I tell people it's fine. You want to just pray to God and that makes you, more peaceful, do that, but sometimes those emissaries of light and those beings are fun to interact with.
So do you communicate with any particular angels, like the archangels, Michael and Raphael and et cetera, or?
Yeah, I don't even know who I'm talking to sometimes. They might not have names, but I do know that the Archangel Michael has been in my life at times, because there have been definite times I needed to set boundaries or needed to fight, politics within a school system for the betterment of the students.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So I just recently discovered you've got some guided meditations on Insight Timer. So I want to refer people to that. Insight Timer, for anyone who doesn't know, it's an app you can download for your iPhone. I'm not sure if it's available on Android or not, but it has tons and tons of guided meditations. And I've listened to a couple of yours over the last couple of days. They're very short. They're very simple. It's something I think people can really understand. And just taking that 10 minutes to sit and to think about this, I think it'd be very beneficial. So I appreciate you putting that out there.
Yeah, medical medium in some of his work actually talks about calling on angels before you take your supplements or your food. So like people who are sick, or people who just want that extra light given to what they're doing, it is a way to interact with that realm. And I'm working with a musician, one of the last pieces on there, Stephen Buckner. He's a really interesting composer. He does some work for films, and he heard one of my meditations and realized it didn't have music, and so we collaborated. But we might do more together, and it's amazing because he has guidance from angels as well. So I think it's just fascinating that we found each other, and I might continue with that.
Yeah, well, something I'll definitely look more into is, like I said, your meditations, I found them to be very helpful. I just found them in the last couple of days. So, and I think you've got some guided meditations on your website also. So I want to say your website is Tricia Barker, NDE, as in near-death-experience.com. And I also remind people that your book is Angels in the OR. And we just kind of lightly skimmed over, your life and your experience. So I would encourage people to get the book. I found it, like I said, I find it to be really fascinating. And it's amazing to me how our lives, I guess, when we look back on them, start to make sense. And when we're going through them, I'm not going to speak for you, but I think, when we're going through these things, it's like, why am I going through this? Right. But when we look back, it starts to make sense. So as I read your story, I'm like, oh, I can see, how all these things led to where you are today.
And I wonder, for someone who hasn't had a near-death experience, do you struggle with, hey, God, do you really love me? Do you really, do you send me love at all times? Is that something that you wonder about?
Yeah. What's really interesting about not having had a near-death experience, because sometimes I do wonder, not only that, but like people, for example, that communicate with their kids that have passed. I've never had one of those kind of communications where I've seen her or heard her or whatever. I'm like, okay, well, why don't I get that? I have to trust that is what's best for me for now, to be doing what I'm doing. And if I were to have that experience, it would change my perspective. And in a sense, like you said, it would take away my faith, because it wouldn't be faith. I would actually know, even though right now I'm like 99.99% sure, I don't have that experience that puts me over that, which allows me, I think, to relate to other people that don't have the experience. So I don't feel like it's that I don't feel that I'm not loved enough. I think that veil is there for me in my life right now for a reason. And I've also learned to be careful what you wish for, because people that do have near-death experiences a lot of times have a hard time integrating back into this world, which is so messed up. And I remember one person, and I can't remember who it was, she even said, I felt like I was rejected by heaven. It's like I wasn't good enough to stay there, so I was sent back almost as like as a punishment. So what I've tried to learn is just to whatever experience I'm having right now are the experiences that I'm supposed to have. And maybe that's been withheld from me because this is what I'm supposed to be doing from the perspective of someone who hasn't had that. So when I talk to other people, because I'm trying to help other people, and like someone asked me the other day, like if I've had this connection with Shana, like I would like to have, and I'm like, no, I haven't. If I said I had, then they would say, oh, well, you're special. You can get through this because you've had that connection. I haven't had it. I haven't had that experience. So I love to, I meditate and I try to reach out and everything, but I do communicate with her literally all day, every day. I was going to say on a daily basis. It's more like all the time. And she motivates everything that I do. So we do have that connection, but not in a physical sense, I guess.
Yeah, and it's that energy of love. You may not have the specific verifiable details or the visuals or, those things that mediums get in conversation, but I think the energy of love must be reaching you, her love.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it definitely is. But I still have to rely on mediums to actually pass me, the messages, and a lot of it's verification. So I'll have an idea or something about what I think Shana's saying to me or whatever, and then, someone will call up and and verify it.
Yeah. And you help a lot of mediums and a lot of people who are on the fence about, do they want to talk with a medium? And I think, your experience in talking about what you've learned from them helps other people open up. And there are a lot of people who are near death or who have lost someone or who've had a serious illness who do suddenly open up to the idea of this communication.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I talk to people. I was with a friend a couple of weeks ago. We've known each other for like 20 years. We went on vacation together 3 weeks ago. No idea that he believed in any of this stuff, but it was during the week of Ions. So you guys are all at Ions. I wanted to go to Ions, but I couldn't go because I was on vacation. So I was talking about Ions the whole week. And anyway, this person just opens up and starts telling me about all these experiences that he had growing up. I've known him for like almost 20 years. I'd never heard this from him before. So I think one of my missions in life is to give people permission to open up and talk about these things and to realize they are not unusual. What I'm finding, the more I research this, which has been probably 15, 20 years now, is they're not as unusual as people think they are. Not just near-death experiences, but precognition, people getting feelings about things, people having dreams about something that then later on happens. And as I shared those things, because those things have happened to me, and I'll tell people, and they'll say, "Oh yeah, I've had that too." So I think that's my role.
Yeah, it's interesting if you phrase it differently and you say how many people here have had a spiritual experience or an unexplained moment, then people will talk about ghost or precognition or a memory of a past life or just this feeling of God's love in church or Jesus's love in a certain cathedral or church. And you find all these experiences that most of us have had, a spiritual experience when you put it that way.
Yeah. Another question I wanted to ask you, because I remember listening to you on a podcast, you were describing this, and it's a concept I've always struggled with, is manifestation. And you talk about it in the book, and I heard you talk about this podcast. You pictured this guy with a hat that was going to come up to you and say a certain thing. And you worked on this, I guess, for weeks or months while you were, laid up, basically bedridden, right? And you were able to manifest this scene. And I thought, well, wow, if it took her that much effort to manifest that scene, how do I have any hope of manifesting anything? So what would you say about manifestation?
It's a concept that I struggle with because there's so many people on this planet who are manifesting at the same time. So aren't we going to come up in conflict with one another? Isn't my dream going to brush up against yours? And then I have to laugh at some elements of it because, how many people are in love with one movie star or musician? They can't all manifest,
Right.
a life with that person.
Right.
It's just not going to happen. And so there's some aspects to it that are silly. And then there's some aspects to it that it's like, what if that was just precognition and I thought it was manifestation? What if that was actually going to happen anyway and I thought that I controlled it? Or what if I did, make this moment happen? So which way is it? I don't know. I just know that it's probably a good idea to focus the brain on what positive things we can do in the world, what we can create as much of the time as we can, because that's healthier for us internally. And that does get us focused outwardly on what good we can do and what good can be accomplished. But what if we're all in this growth cycle? And, if I think that I want to reach this certain place, but I reach right here, well, that's where my growth is to go, okay, well, I got here, why? And what's going on? And what do I still need to work on in myself? And not take it so hard. And then I don't know why, but I mean, this might offend some people, but I get really annoyed by some people who believe in it too strongly. And they're like, yes, you can just create an alternate reality. And then suddenly, if you believe it strongly enough, that's where you'll exist. And I think, no, I don't buy that. That doesn't strike me at some kind of gut level. You're turning on the news and you're seeing me in my town going through whatever I'm going through. You're still a part of it. You're still a part of this world, this time period, this culture, this manifestation of what everybody is creating all around you. So how do you just add your vision of goodness and start breaking through some of that? And that seems to be the bigger point. But what if things were going to happen anyway? What if so many people think that they've manifested something and it's just the lesson that they're going to learn? I mean, that's something that Matt Kahn brought up in this video, Releasing Judgment, that really kind of struck me. And I thought, so say a woman who's had 2 bad relationships is like, okay, I'm going to date this type of guy and I'm going to, manifest him. And then she ends up with him. What if just because she had these bad relationships, she was going to choose someone differently anyway? Like, what if she didn't manifest it? What if it just was going to happen?
Well, I love your answer, and I really appreciate you saying that. And it was interesting because when you were talking through that, what if it was going to happen anyway? I had a very small situation a few weeks ago. I was out for a walk in the morning. It was kind of a gray day, and it was raining and everything. And I was going through my gratitude practice, and I thought, it's a beautiful day. And I thought, why did I think that? It's not a beautiful day. I live in Ohio. The ground's wet. It's cloudy. It's not a beautiful day. And I thought, well, when I finish this part of my walk, I walk in silence for a while. I'm going to listen to the song by Queen called It's a Beautiful Day. So I'm thinking this, and I look up and I see a woman. She's standing across the street, and she's like taking her kids to the bus stop. And she looks at me and she says, it's really beautiful, or something like that. And I was like, excuse me? She said, it's a beautiful day. Literally, she said, it's a beautiful day. And I thought, wow, okay. And then as I thought about that for the next couple of days, I'm like, okay, did she read my mind? Did I push a thought into her head, or was it just a coincidence, But it was one of those moments that made me think, right? So it's kind of like with you and the guy with the hat, like you said, was it precognition? Well, that would be pretty wild anyway. Whether it was precognition or manifestation, either one says there's something beyond the reality that we think we can see. So, maybe it doesn't really matter. And you're right, it can't hurt to think good thoughts. So why not do that? So I love that answer.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hi there. I'm really excited to tell you about my latest ebook. It's 4 lessons that you can learn from the near-death experience without going through all the trouble of dying to learn them. I've been studying NDEs for several years now. I am completely convinced that not only are they 100% real, but that there's some very universal wisdom that we can get from the near-death experience. And I've distilled that down in this book into 4 short lessons. And I've also given you all the reasons why I believe that NDEs are absolutely real. So go to www.grieftogrowth.com/NDE lessons to pick it up for free. www.growth.com/NDE lessons. I hope you enjoy it.
Thanks. And it is a concept I still struggle with, but it's one that I think I had to accept on some level, because I think there's some level of victim blaming. When bad things happen to people, then they often say, oh, you manifested this. And I think, what if you were born into a different time period? Did you manifest all the things that would happen to you as a woman or as an African-American man at a different time? I mean, no, you didn't. Right. There's no way that you could. You just were surrounded by a culture where thought manifestations were predominantly this one way. So you're going to come up against that. Now, there's always heroes, and there's always people who, find a way to move into a different way of being and teach others a lesson about that time period. But like you think of if you're born into an era where there's a lot of plague, if you get the plague, you didn't cause that to happen.
Right. Well, that's the flip side of the whole manifestation thing. And I grew up, Pentecostal, and I heard a lot about prosperity gospel, right? So it's very much the same thing. A lot of times if you give enough money, but if you give enough money or you believe strongly enough, then this is going to happen to you. And if it doesn't work out that way, well, then you just didn't have enough faith. It's your fault. It's your fault that you're sick. It's your fault that you were in an accident. And I don't believe it works that way. So if it doesn't work that way, I don't think we can say the flip side works either, that if you just think strongly enough that, not everybody on this planet is not going to be a millionaire. I don't think that's what we're all here for. So that's why I don't personally buy into it at that level, but I am working on more of the, thinking positively, having gratitude. I'd say in my book, when I'm talking about grief, gratitude is a very, very great tool to use, even though it may seem crazy when you're going through difficult times. But if you can find those things to focus on that are going well, it can change your entire experience.
Yeah, and you made a great point about the beautiful day. I mean, depression or grief kind of blocks out all of the beauty. And so it's really just noticing the beauty. It's noticing, wow, the sunlight in the trees is really gorgeous. Why am I feeling this bad?
Yeah. Well, for me, I guess it was really weird because it was a gray day. And that's what made it so fascinating, because it was gray and it was rainy. And I'm like, I hate rainy days. But for some reason, the thought came to me, okay, but I'm out and I'm walking and I'm healthy and, it's not hot, I'm not sweating. So I just started thinking, because I was going through my gratitude practice, and I was able to say, it's not a beautiful day, ostensibly, it's not what we would call a beautiful day, but I was able to have that gratitude because I worked on that hard.
Yeah. That when you go through something difficult too, you become grateful for health, or you become grateful for the small things, and we forget there'll be a time when we're all leaving the planet and we can't get up off that bed, and we'll look back and go, oh, I miss walking in the rain, or I miss, having that ability. And so might as well enjoy it now. Well,
that's where I try to learn from, like I said, every experience like yours and you being, laid up the way you were. So when I'm doing gratitude, I'm like, sometimes I'm just grateful. I'm grateful I can walk, because we take it for granted, but, it's not guaranteed to any of us.
Yeah, definitely.
So I wanted to ask you, I know you're a teacher, but I was just looking at your blog before I got on. I think you're on leave now. So what is it you're working on now?
Yeah, so I'm interviewing a lot of different college administrators and people who have programs for college success. And I'm looking at what people do across the country and trying to bring that back to my community college where I teach, and come up with both a book for students and some recommendations for faculty and staff. And one recommendation that just hit me, and it's just wonderful. There's people get trained to help other people who are dealing with mental illness. So kind of like mental health first aid training. And this can be just a 2-day training, but a lot of my students might know someone who's suicidal and they don't really know what to do. They don't know how to help that person. And so that creates a bigger community. Just, you can go give CPR to someone who falls down, or, someone who's in a violent marriage, you can, give them steps for shelters and so forth. But mental illness is, whether it's an eating disorder or depression or other things, sometimes we don't know what to do. We just oh, I'm so sorry that you're feeling bad, instead of giving people the tools, then the first aid that they need. So that's one thing that really kind of struck me. But I'm just looking at what people are doing across the country and kind of trying to pull it all together, because not every kid who enters college goes through the same thing. One person might just be sad about losing their grandparent, and that's the main thing that they're dealing with, is that loss of that relationship. And another kid might have 14 students that were their friends over the course of their high school time who killed themselves. And so there's like a mass outbreak of suicide among teens who are in poverty, who are coming out as gay or lesbian, who have self-esteem issues, body image issues. There can be like a whole conflux of problems. And so, one person might have a lot, and one person might only be dealing with grief and organizational skills that they need to work on. So I'm trying to give a really comprehensive book that just kind of points people in the direction of resources that will help them, because not everyone needs the same thing.
That sounds awesome. That sounds awesome and very much needed. I was talking with a friend the other day who's he's got mental health issues and he's very open about it. And he's been suicidal, and he was making some remarks about, because it was Suicide Prevention Day or Suicide Awareness Day. And he said, well, don't say this to a suicidal person. Basically don't say just get outside and exercise or go to the gym, you'll feel better. I said, well, what should I say? And he actually wrote a big long article about it, and it actually gave it to me, and I shared it with my friends, and then he published it. But we don't know what to say to people that are struggling. A lot of times we don't know what to say. We don't say anything at all. And what I try to tell people is, just sometimes a 15 or 20-minute conversation with somebody, you never know how it might change your life. So to have that resource that someone can go to and say, okay, well, this gives me kind of a handbook. I know what to do. I think that would be an awesome resource.
Yeah. And it's sad how many creative people, musicians, poets, and I teach a lot of the creative writing students do struggle with that, but people struggle with it from all walks of life. And that's a great, I'd like to read that article that your friend wrote. You'll have to send it to me. Yeah, I'll send you a link for sure. Well, Tricia, I really appreciate you doing the podcast with me today. It's been awesome getting to meet you. It was great to read your book. So I wanted to mention the book again. It's Angels in the OR, and you can find Tricia at triciabarkernde.com. On YouTube, I know you've interviewed a lot of people on YouTube. I know you speak all over the place. So keep doing what you're doing. I think it's great. Thanks. You too. And I look forward to reading your book and watching you as you make more podcasts and reach more people. I think it's awesome. Awesome. Thank you very much. Have a good afternoon. You too. Well, that's it for another episode of Grief to Growth. This is your host, Brian Smith. Reach out to me anytime at grieftogrowth.com. That's GRIEF, 2, growth.com. I look forward to hearing from you, and I'll be back with you with another podcast soon. Hi there. I hope you enjoyed this latest episode of the podcast, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. What questions came up for you? What did you like about it? What didn't you like about it? I invite you to visit us at grieftogrowth.circle.so. That's grief, 2, growth.circle.so to continue the conversation with me and with other listeners. It's a space to sound off, to share reactions, and to go deeper into the topics from the show. I look forward to chatting more, and I hope to see you there.